Hi, I'm Gary Null. Today, we're going to begin our program, as always, with a health issue. But instead of giving you several different studies from different institutions that can help us live a longer and healthier life, instead, I'm going to deal with one issue, like a classroom on the air. This issue is very important. And now I'm seeing the so-called woke politicians getting the so-called woke authorities and so-called experts in to talk about being overweight. And I absolutely could not believe what I was hearing. One of these new appointees that will oversee much of our government's program on health and nutrition says that being overweight has nothing to do with exercising and a good diet and a mindset. No, it has to do with genetics. That is completely wrong. There is absolutely zero science, real science, supporting that. To the contrary, there are thousands of studies on Library of Medicine's PubMed site you can get for yourself that shows that what really causes us to be overweight is not genetics. It's our conditioned response to the environment we grew up in to begin with. That's where it begins. Now, when I grew up, and many of you grew up, if you're over the age of 50, you were outdoors playing a lot. In fact, until the 6th grade, when you had to go to a grade school, you would play and come in, have lunch, go out and play and come in, have dinner, and then generally 8 o'clock, you'd be in bed. Well, that's not the case today. As a result, for the first time in American history, and completely different than any other country in the world, we have young people who have adult diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, who are overweight or obese, and no one is talking about it. Nothing is being done about it. We're told that, well, this isn't their genes. Well, what about parents that are completely normal weight and their kids are overweight and teenagers are overweight? What happens when you're completely normal in your weight when you were young and healthy and active, and now you're out of college and you begin to get weight? Is that genetic? No, it's not. It's absurd. And yet that is what current policy is being built around. And that is the propaganda you'll be told on a regular basis. Why is it, for example, in France, they do not have an epidemic of ADD and ADHD, hyperactivity disorders? Because in France, they have a good diet. They exercise. They have school time and recess. Remember recess, where kids could go out in the playground and run and play and yell and scream and do what kids do? Well, we don't have that any longer in the United States. And to prove that, for my film, The Drugging of Our Children, I went to schools all over the New York area. And then in Florida, I went to schools as well. And depending upon the cultural background of the parents, you could see the activity of the child. More activity, less activity, good diet, bad diet. And with the more active parents and the more active children, there was no obesity. However, here's what we have to understand. A lot of cultures, everyone eats the same food at the same time and generally in the same amounts. So a child learns from their adults. So whatever the adult is doing, the child will mimic. So let's just say that in the 1950s, most Americans, no matter what their background, cultural, ethnic, they ate dinner somewhere between 5 and 6 o'clock. They sat at a table and ate, where all the discussions would occur of what happened that day, problems to be solved, joy, laughter, the communion of people that we were closest to. Now, that meant that there was also the idea of not overeating, because our parents, more often than not, were born during the Great Depression or before, went through World War II, where the rationing of everything, and as a result, brought to us, the baby boomers, the idea of frugality. For example, did you learn from your parents? Don't buy what you can't afford. Now, you could lay it away. Remember layaway? You would lay something away. You'd pay a small amount of what it was. And then whether it was 3 months, 6 months, or a year, you could go in and get it and pay for it. We didn't have credit cards. Everyone had a savings account. They had a little book. You could look in the book and see how much you had and how much interest you earned. generally anywhere from 2 to 6% interest. We did not have national debt. We did not have a medical industrial complex that could charge us upwards of $10,000. True story, happened to a friend of mine named Angelo, went into a hospital with just a stomach ache. And he was concerned, and they didn't do anything for him. They gave him a simple saline solution, cost about $1 to make that. He was there for a couple hours, and then he left. No medications, nothing, no x-rays, $10,000 bill, and he had to pay it. Can you remember when your family doctor actually would come to your home? Or everyone in the family had the same doctor? The doctor knew who you were. Your kids went to school together. My family doctor, all of us went to the same school. We were friends. We played together. So when something happened to someone, they had a better understanding of what the larger and contextual environment was. That's all gone now. When was the last time a doctor came to your home? When was the last time you were taught about lifestyle, healthy lifestyle, exercise on a regular basis, eating a healthy diet, all right? And being mindful of not doing something to some extreme that you could hurt yourself. So everything has changed for a new generation. In fact, it started with the X generation who didn't have to struggle. We were the ones who were getting college educated. Our parents didn't have education. In fact, no parent I knew growing up in my hometown had gone to college, but they were all successful at life. They were good people. They taught us manners and morals and ethics. They taught us to help our senior citizens to respect them. We always looked for the great aunt or uncle or grandparent to talk to us if we couldn't talk with our parents because they were more patient and wise. It's all gone for many people. And yet we even want that even more disintegrated. Our original traditions, they weren't perfect. We've never had a perfect society, but we've made major progress. And you can't deny that, but people do deny that. So just imagine them when the fast food started to come in the late 1950s and 60s. Again, I can remember in my hometown, much like American Graffiti, the movie, which showed us, teenagers socializing and commiserating and the, foibles of their life at that time. But they would hang out at one of these fast food joints. And we had one of those in my hometown. We had a Shoshone and a big boy. And that's when you would go on a weekend. Monday through Friday, you didn't. But on Saturday, yeah, you could. And so we would have some junk food, but it wouldn't be all the time. Today, it's all the time, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and afterwards. When I grew up, we didn't do drugs. And today, it's common. We didn't have medication. We didn't have any autism, not a single case in children or adults. If somehow people said, well, you missed autism, you just didn't understand it. Well, then we would have seen it in the adult. They wouldn't be able to function. But we didn't have it. We didn't have suicide. I was in the largest high school in West Virginia, 3,500 students. Never saw suicide. Never saw someone going to a mental institution. Never saw someone overacting out. Yeah, we had some smart alecks and we had bullies, and someone would always put them in their place. Someone who was bigger, tougher from the football team or wrestling team would say, don't bully people, and teachers would get involved. We knew our teachers. You could communicate with them. We knew our curriculum. Now, whether it taught us all the right things or there was slanting in it, surely there was. But still, we learned about the world we live in. We learned about the meaning of life and our purpose in life, our place in life. Now, why am I giving this the larger picture? Because we're not looking anywhere at any time at the larger picture, the larger contextual problems and issues and solutions of our life. We're getting so close to a problem by being inundated by all these media platforms and so many people thinking they're experts at something, and no one willing to acknowledge that most of us don't have a whole lot of answers, and the answers we do have don't always work, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. So we come back to the idea of being overweight, because I only remember 2 people in my whole class that were overweight, And that's because their family was overweight. They ate a lot of food and they ate unhealthy food. And he was not, neither one of these people were athletes, but everyone else, they were strong. Everybody was in shape because that was one of the criteria. You had to have the slick back hair, right? The DAs, and you had to be, tough and strong and athletic, and or you had to be the geek and be into the classics and other languages and foreign exchange students. But we didn't have heart disease. We didn't have cancers. We didn't have all the problems we have today. And yet we didn't live a long life. Why? The average lifespan when I was growing up and you were growing up was in the mid-60s. And if a person lived to be 70, that was unique. Wow. I had an aunt that lived to be 70 and everyone went, wow. But everyone else died. My mother and father died 2 years apart at 58. And they didn't look good. They looked old and haggard. Why? 3 things. Everybody smoked all the time. I mean, there were ashtrays overflowing, at least in my house. And I was the person that would run around and throw all the ashtrays, and the couches all were burnt because of the cigarettes falling out on them. Everything stunk. I was exposed to that secondhand smoke. You were exposed, if you were in a home of smokers, to secondhand smoke. And what are the 2 leading conditions that come from that? Lung cancer and emphysema and heart attacks. Because you just don't damage your lungs when you smoke. You damage your heart and the blood vessels and the inner lining of your arteries. And then we didn't exercise. Why? Because exercise was for kids. And if you were going to go to college and you were going to be an athlete, fine. But otherwise, by the time you got out of high school and didn't go to college, you never exercised. There were no gyms. There was no biking clubs. No, we didn't jog. There were no marathons. In fact, one time I was going to visit some friends, and they lived actually right off a bridge. You could walk up the bridge, look both ways, make sure there's no traffic, go across the bridge, 2-lane bridge, into a house where this Italian family lived. And I remember being late, so I was jogging down there. And a cop car stopped me. He says, "What are you running from?" I said, I'm late for friends. And they didn't understand jogging. In fact, twice I was out in my gym suit doing a longer run, and I was stopped again. They'd never heard of jogging. So we didn't exercise. Everybody smoked. I was the only one who didn't. All of my friends smoked. All their parents smoked. Everybody stunk. And they drank alcohol, not to get drunk. They drank beer, and I mean they had beer bellies, big beer bellies, because on Saturdays and Sundays, it was a tradition that everyone went to taverns, and they would watch sports, and they would eat fried fish or fried chicken that was salted like crazy. I know because I worked in the kitchen, and they'd just be hitting that salt shaker. And I said, "Why all that salt?" Well, because the saltier it is, the more beer they're going to drink. And that kind of stunned me. And I thought, whoa. And sure enough, good people sitting around enjoying each other's company. There's something else. This is a complete aside, but see if you can appreciate this. One day, while working in a tavern, and this was a social club where they came and shot pool and played ping pong in the back room and sat at tables and talked. A guy started to talk about when he was on the Big Red football team and he went through, it took about 10 minutes to go through the play, and he caught the ball in the end zone like you see in one of the movies, and he won the game. All right. And everybody, "I've heard that story 10 times. He said, "Yes, and you'll hear it another 10 times. I said, "Why?" I'm about 16 years old. He said, "Because everyone in this bar, everyone in this tavern," it's called a tavern, everyone did something at some point in their life that made them kind of stand out. Biff, down at the end of the bar, he could take a glass of beer and drink it all in one gulp. No one could do that. So he became famous for that. So these people know that the rest of their life, they will never do anything that allows them to stand out. Everybody now fits in. The uniqueness of youth is gone. The conformity of being an adult has set in. When these guys are 30 years old, they'll be middle-aged. 30 years old, you're middle-aged. When I was growing up and you were growing up, many of you. So he said, so give them their opportunity, because everyone else knows everyone's story and can say it themselves. And that's part of that tradition of passing down word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth. He said, you remember when you were about 5 years old, we'd go from McDonald's farm. My father had some financial interest. I think he owned half the farm. Anyhow, I loved being out there, especially in the summertime. They didn't have indoor toilets. They had what was called back then, I don't know if you've heard this term, it wasn't an outhouse, it was a kaibo. And you go in and you look down, there would be a wooden seat, it stunk, and you look down to see if there was a snake or a spider, somebody's going to bite you on the butt. So anyhow, you sit there. But the bathtub was out in the lawn, and they would do what was called a sun bath. So by mid-afternoon, the sun had hit in the summertime, the sun would hit the water and it'd warm it up, and you get in the bathtub, right? And then in the house, in the kitchen, they had this pump, and you pump just like you'd see in the old movies, and you'd be cranking that pump and water would come out from a well. No one ever tested the water to see how much zinc and iron and any other toxin could be in it. But it was a good life. People were happy. They shared. They had your back. They were friends for life. There were no temporary friends. But they all smoked. They all drank to socialize. They would have a meal, and right after the meal, they had to have dessert. And dessert was always something that was really sugar-laden and just packed with sugar. And almost every meal was the same. It would be some form of meat and lots of it, and mashed potatoes and gravy with biscuits. Now, I watched in the kitchen. I'd get on a chair, and I'd get up on this and look over the sink of my mom cooking. And I said, what's that? She said, that's gravy. And it'd be white flour with lots of salt and pepper, and then a powdered cow's blood, and then it would bubble up. And it really was gross. It was just, imagine, I'm sure you've all seen someone who had problems with saliva glands, and they just bubble, bubble, bubble. Oh, God. I once had I was in high school. I was very shy. I was very naive. And it was one of those prom parties, and someone came over to give me a kiss. And I looked up, and I'd never kissed a girl. And all these bubbles are coming out of her mouth. I thought, no, I'm not going there. I shook her hand, says, it was nice to meet you, walked away. I don't know why I think of these strange things, these memories from back home. But then it smelled. You could smell the blood. And I said, Mom, that's blood. She said, well, that's what makes it kind of the gravy, the brownness that comes together. Mashed potatoes always had this brown sauce. And so you had the mashed potatoes, which were white, and you make a little hole in it, and you put the gravy in the middle. Remember that? And then you take a white piece of, it was just a complete white carbohydrate. It was white flour, the biscuit, you put some butter on, and then you sop that biscuit right into that gravy. And they would take the biscuit, at least my family did, and whatever was left on the plate, well, they would wipe it up and eat it. So there was nothing left on the plate. And then they'd say, okay, and they were full. They had big pieces of meat. And then out would come dessert. And I'm thinking, where are they going to put that? You got to have like a plunger to push the food down their esophagus because there's no more room. And then they would all go over and lay on couches. And there was a permanent indentation on a couch where human body, like they were comatose from eating so much. And then they would sit there and go to sleep and slobber and everything else. Very gross. But I'm a kid who's watching all this. with an acute eye. And I'm wondering, what's this about? But in the country, to get back to that, on Saturday, we would fill up these big containers, stainless steel containers of milk. And that was always fun, milking the cows. And suddenly all the cats are sitting there all in a row, and you just be squirting one in the bottle and one over there to the cats. And the cats were all covered because you couldn't go in the mouth. Come close. You tried. And the cats were just covered in milk. And then they licked each other's face off. And I'd take these containers, put in back a pickup truck. Here's the interesting part. We went to the downtown, the old area of Parkersburg, meaning from the 1800s, these buildings. And there was a big old general store down there. And I would help my dad take it in there, and then they would pour all this milk into a larger, gigantic container. And that's where people got their fresh milk. And it come with non-homogenized. So in the morning, you get all this fresh, sweet cream at the top of the bottle. And that's what my mom would take and put into the oatmeal, and with some honey that I would have in the morning. That was my breakfast almost every morning. In any case, these older men would be sitting around in like a circle, and they were all just had a piece of wood, and they were just with a knife cutting the wood, just, and shaving the wood down to nothing. They didn't get another piece. And I'm sitting as a kid. I'm like 5 years old, and my father said, I said, Dad, they don't talk. He said, oh, yeah, they're talking, but in a way that you wouldn't understand. Look at their eyes. Someone comes in that they don't know, their eye looks one way. And who is that person? Kind of squinting with their eyes. If they're happy to see you, they give you a little nod with the eye and the chin. He said, these are older people who've spent their whole lives as friends. And they want to stay that friend to the last moment. And here they come because they have the companionship of older people sharing together. He said, Gary, think of it this way. He said, some of these men are old enough. One of these guys is 95, a rare exception. He lived in the country, ate healthy, and was vigorous, because when you're on a farm, you work. I mean, you work. It's kind of fun for people in the city to go out. Remember when they used to pay the Amish farmers, the Mennonites, over in Pennsylvania and Ohio, to go live for a week on their farm and learn farming and just be out and be around animals and natural things? It grounds you, and live on a farm. I've lived on a farm since 1970, upstate for 14 years. Then the Healing Springs Ranch. A ranch is different, lots of work, for 8 years, and now for 26 years on this homestead ranch down here. And every day they're chores. Got to clean up the barn, lifting hay, fixing fences, always something to do. And you keep strong, you keep vigorous, but it grounds you. It creates an environment of humility. And we need to be more humble. We grow when we're humble and silent. We're listening and we're growing. Anyhow, so I learned a lesson from my father. He said, one of that gentleman there was alive during the Civil War. Really? Yes. His father fought in the Civil War. Wow. For the Union. Okay. No, that didn't mean a whole lot to me then, but when I would later write a book when I was 17 on the history of Parkersburg, an early history, that was my first book. And I met all these old people who had all these photographs, and they gave them to me. But what I didn't see dementia in the older people. I didn't see Alzheimer's. I didn't see hyperactivity, and I didn't see obesity. Whatever pattern of health they had early in life, they followed it forward. And those who were healthy, who didn't smoke, the few that I knew who didn't, like some of my school teachers didn't smoke, didn't drink, they lived long lives. And you didn't have to retire back then. You could be a teacher at 90. And we loved our teachers. We loved our teachers because they were so important in the transition of not knowing anything and being idiots the knowing something and being less of an idiot to appreciating how smart everyone else was who was older than we were, and looking forward, actually wanting to be older because we would know more than what we did at that time. We were fun, we were curious, we were mischievous, as all kids should be. We didn't have helicopter mothers or soccer fathers or bulldozer parents. No, nobody had to bribe someone to get you into a college because you weren't smart enough to get in. Meritocracy was important. If you didn't know something, you were held back. You were taken to night school until you did, because they wanted you to succeed. It was just a different world, not perfect, but also a lot less stressful than what it is today. Now, why this whole story? Because of this. Today, we have the most overweight group of people in the world per population. Think of that for a moment. Over 65% of American adults are obese. Almost 90% are overweight. We have obesity and morbid obesity in children. We have children born today who will not outlive their parents. Why? It's not genetic. It is because they're not exercising, they're not sleeping properly, they spend too much time on their computers, almost 6 to 7 hours a day, their laptops, they're sedentary, they're dealing with stressors, they're overly protected, they can't make mistakes, they're considered perfect angels, and they're not. So when they meet the real world, they don't know how to handle it. They're unprepared. So they stay in bubbles. They stay in little tribal units. They don't integrate their thoughts with others. As a result, there's no unification. There's no appreciating the best of all cultures. To the contrary of, you can't eat Mexican food. If you're not Mexican, that's culinary appropriation. What an idiot. What an idiot. How moronic is that? We enjoy other cultures' cuisines and clothes and music and input. I love going to London. I used to go to London almost every year and spend 2 weeks to a month there because of its learning about its history, the best and worst of its history, learning from some of the great humanitarians, Dr. Cleve and Dr. Dennis Burkitt and Dr. John Yetkin, and learning about their spiritual association and Harry Edwards and how they had spiritual healers where we didn't in the United States. We didn't believe in any of that. And learning about their farming and the English garden. Some of the most beautiful gardens in the world are Italian gardens and English gardens. And how they look at life. And you can't do that through a textbook. You have to be in front of someone. You have to communicate with, you have to listen and ask the right questions. And yet today, we say, you can't wear a French design dress because that's appropriation. No, it's not. It's appreciation. It's bringing people together. Would you then tell every Mexican you can only eat Mexican food in the United States? Italian, you can only eat in Italian restaurants. And when you go to a grocery store, don't you dare buy something that's not grown in the United States for American cuisine, because that's appropriation. It's just insane. And we have this movement that is an uncontrollable surge of stupid. And yet we're codifying it as if it's real, and it's not. And they want to tear down cultures that have existed and traditions that have had unity and love and respect. And they want to wipe away all that. Well, they're not going to succeed. So the next time someone tells you on television, I was appointed by this government based upon meritocracy, so I'm going to tell you it's never your fault that you're fat. And I'm saying it's almost always your fault you're fat. You can't use the word fat. Disproportionate weight. No, you're fat. And how did you get fat? And when you're saying, don't. Oh, if we stay overweight, here's what happens. The heart doesn't grow in association with the additional weight. As a result, you will absolutely die of a heart attack or stroke at some point because of that heart having to pump blood through this massive amount of overweight. You will also make yourself more susceptible to cancer and other inflammatory conditions because it's pro-inflammatory. You're creating massive amounts of free radical. You're going to damage the interior lining of your arteries, the endothelium. You're going to cause cuts and scrapes in there, scrapes, and that's going to be healed, but not really healed. And that's going to block your arteries. And as a result, these steroid pigments and cholesterol that build up at those cut places to try to help it, hinder it. So now one day you're going to think you're okay and you're going to drop dead. Now, if you want to be that way as an adult, that's your business. That's your freedom of choice. Wrong choice, but it's your choice. And the consequences are yours. And the people that love you would like to see you be more disciplined and focused, but it's still your choice, your call. But for our children, our infants, our teenagers, who know nothing about anything, yeah, they're watching everything. They're absorbing everything. So what you do as an adult in a meaningful way and mindful can help save their life and give them a longer life. Otherwise, a lot of adults today will go to the funeral of their children. And if you ask why did Bobby die at 16? Why did they commit suicide? Why did they take fentanyl? Why are they diagnosed with ADD and taking Ritalin? Because at some point you trusted the authorities. You trusted the business community. You trusted corporate America. You trusted the media showing you the ads. You trusted the so-called authorities. Well, ADD and ADHD are normal. No, they're not. And 90% of it isn't real and doesn't exist. So at one point we have to stop and say, shouldn't we pay attention to the basics? When people say, don't sweat the small stuff and everything is small stuff, say just the opposite. If I deal with the small stuff, nothing gets to become the big stuff. And right now, we're inundated with big stuff that we didn't take care of. But we need this journey. We need these lessons. As painful as they may be, that's how we change. Society's not going to change. No corporation's going to change. No institution's going to change. Where are the religious leaders protesting the war in Yemen? Are those children not sacred? Or in Ukraine? Why aren't they speaking up? When I was growing up, we had the Berrigan brothers. We had the Catholic nuns out there being arrested to protest the war in Vietnam. And Daniel Ellsberg gave us the Pentagon Papers from the Rand Corporation showing you the real intent of why we were in Vietnam and how we were losing. And McNamara was lying, and Kennedy was lying, and all the other people in his cabinet were lying, Clifford, Rusk, about our success in Vietnam. And it was those Pentagon Papers that allowed us to see the truth. And that's when we protested even more, because we had bona fide truth. Just like now, the Twitter files shows the truth. Today, I would say that the Twitter files are more important than the Pentagon Papers. And Daniel Ellsberg is a hero. I've interviewed him many times. Right now, he is in the process of passing. And that's unfortunate. He's in his 90s. He wrote a wonderful letter. It was very meaningful. I read it and, really touched my heart that he had lived a good life and he had this terminal illness. The doctors couldn't do any more. But we still reached out to him. We spoke to him and then spoke to his wife in a subsequent phone call, but they're not able to do any alternative therapies. They just accept it, and it's metastasized now. So that's unfortunate. Great person. He will always be remembered for what he did. Well, today, we have to think about Matt Taibbi and others who are telling us the truth at the cost to their own reputation about everything in the social media when it comes to any controversial issue or pro-government issue has been lies upon lies upon lies upon lies. And the mainstream media never once challenged it. Why did it take Elon Musk buying Twitter and then exposing the corruption, the FBI and the CIA and all the major intelligence agencies who were telling Twitter, this you ban, this you allow, this you promote, this you don't allow. and not a single condemnation from anyone in the media. That shows you why then should you ever listen to Chuck Scharber or any of these people, any of these dancing clowns in the media. You shouldn't, because they're just filled with lies. Anyhow, this comes full circle because now, as long as you tell people it's not your fault that you're overweight, it's your genes, then just imagine how many more people are going to continue bad habits and die and suffer prematurely. All right? If we really care about people and you don't shame them, that's not good at all. You work with them. You become a model. You become their support system. Try to motivate them, change their perception so that they love life, love themselves, and want to live a longer life for themselves and their loved ones. That's our Classroom on the Air for today. I want to thank you for being a part of it. And remember, you can go to my radio show on PRN.Live, PRN, which stands for Progressive Radio Network, .live, L-I-V-E, at noon, Monday to Friday, and then Tuesday, 7 to 8 in the evening for the Progressive Commentary Hour, and hear all the material, or go to our archive. Look at all the other great talent that we have, the Ralph Naders and the Naomi Wolfs. We have wonderful human beings who've spent their life helping the downtrodden, those who are the masses who are not cared for or thought of positively. Well, they're your support system. So just tune in to all the shows 24/7 because they're there for you. I look forward to sharing another Classroom on the Air on an upcoming program. Have a nice day.
Are you tired of closed-minded programming? Well, look no further than PRN.Live, the home for progressive voices.